I am Violet. I am 33, and I just dropped a black leather binder onto the pine picnic table at my family's annual summer barbecue. The country music from the portable speaker kept playing, but the yard went dead silent. Inside that binder were bank ledgers proving my mother stole over $1 million meant for my care and funneled it into luxury cars and my cousin's college tuition. I spent my 20s working overtime to pay off $45,000 in student loans, while she cashed checks with my name on them. But the financial fraud was only the second worst thing in that binder. Sitting on top of the bank statements was a printed genetic report, a 0% DNA match to the man holding a spatula at the grill. The man my mother swore was my father. My mother pointed a manicured finger at me. Her voice cracked as she yelled that my real father never wanted me, that he paid them to keep me away because I was a burden. And that was the exact moment the wealthy family friend who had attended every barbecue for 33 years stepped out from the shadow of the patio awning. He walked right up to the table. He dropped a folded non-disclosure agreement next to my binder. He looked my mother dead in the eye and said, "I never abandoned her. You held her hostage." My uncle dropped his beer bottle. It shattered on the concrete patio. He turned and walked out the gate without a backward glance, leaving my mother to face the ruins of her 3-decade lie. Welcome back to Aura Vengeance, where quiet people finally stop taking the blame and start keeping the receipts. If you have ever been the scapegoat to a family that cares more about their image than the truth, you are in the right place. Drop a comment telling me your age and where you are listening from, and be sure to subscribe so the next story finds you. To understand how I dismantled my mother's flawless suburban reality in under a minute, we have to rewind 6 months. The collapse did not begin with an argument. It began with a single drop of blood. The thin paper crinkled beneath my legs on the exam table. Outside the clinic window, the Wasatch Mountains cut a sharp line against the pale Salt Lake City sky. Dr. Aris clicked a silver pen against his clipboard. He scanned my annual lab results. His brow furrowed just enough to signal a discrepancy. "Violet, we flagged a specific autoimmune marker in your panels." He tapped a line of text on his tablet. "It is a genetic precursor for Hashimoto's disease. Is there any history of thyroid issues on either side of your family?" I stared at the pristine white floor tiles. My mother, Brenda, and the man who raised me, Greg, treated their genetic code like a prized heirloom. They boasted about their pioneer stock and their flawless metabolisms. In our house, illness was treated as a character flaw, a weakness to be trained away. "No," I replied, my voice stayed level. "None." But my brain snagged on the question. My job is healthcare compliance auditing. I spend 40 hours a week hunting down billing anomalies across sprawling hospital networks. I track missing numbers. I find the discrepancies other people want buried. So when the doctor asked the question, my mind went straight to work. A memory flickered. Summer holidays in our backyard, Greg applying thick coats of zinc oxide to his pale skin, yet blistering raw within an hour of sun exposure. Then I pictured my own reflection in the bathroom mirror. Dark hair, olive undertones tanning to a deep bronze by mid-July. I shared that physical trait with exactly one person in our orbit, David Harrison. David was a real estate developer and Uncle Richard's former business partner. He attended every family gathering. He always hovered near the edge of the yard, a quiet fixture in our lives. I remembered being 12 years old when a neighbor leaned over the fence and casually pointed out that I shared David's exact coloring. Brenda dropped a platter of burgers on the grass. The ceramic shattered. Her smile went brittle and sharp as she grabbed the neighbor by the elbow and steered her into the kitchen, shutting the conversation down fast. Dr. Aris handed me a referral slip, pulling me back to the present. I walked out to my car, the dry Utah heat pressed down on the asphalt. I sat in the driver's seat and traced the edge of the steering wheel. I thought about the way Brenda always managed my appearance, keeping my hair cut short, forbidding me from wearing colors that highlighted my olive skin. I had always assumed it was just her standard suburban vanity, a mother wanting a daughter who fit the neighborhood mold. But looking at the referral slip in my hand, the puzzle pieces started shifting into a new configuration. An auditor knows that a single missing receipt often points to a secondary set of books. A single unexplained autoimmune marker pointed to a secondary set of genetics. A normal daughter might have called her mother to ask about the test results. She might have demanded clarity or reassurance. I do not demand clarity. I extract it. I pulled out my phone. I navigated to a genetics testing website. I bypassed the Ancestry fun facts and ordered their most comprehensive medical DNA kit. I paid for expedited overnight shipping. The confirmation email hit my inbox before I even started the engine. I put the car in drive and pulled out of the clinic parking lot. The system was now in motion. And systems, unlike people, do not know how to lie. The cardboard package arrived on my porch 2 days later. It was remarkably small for something possessing the power to dismantle a 30-year-old narrative. I carried it to my kitchen island and sliced the tape with a paring knife. Inside lay a plastic vial, a sterile swab, and a barcode. My daily routine consists of verifying chains of custody for sensitive medical data. I treat evidence with surgical precision. I washed my hands, set a timer for 60 seconds, and rubbed the textured cotton tip against the inside of my cheek. I sealed the vial inside the biohazard bag and logged the tracking number into a secure spreadsheet on my laptop. On my way to the office, I dropped the return envelope into a blue postal box on the corner. The metal door clanged shut. The audit had officially begun. I did not expect the opposition to detect my movements so quickly. I underestimated the surveillance network my mother maintained. The breach happened on a Saturday morning. My cousin Tyler dropped by my condo unannounced. Tyler is Uncle Richard's son. He's 26 years old, drives a late-model luxury sedan he never seems to make payments on, and carries the effortless confidence of a golden boy who has never been told no. He knocked twice and walked right in, using the spare key I was forced to give my parents for emergencies. He claimed he needed to borrow my camping cooler for a weekend trip. As I pulled the cooler from the hall closet, Tyler wandered into my kitchen. I heard the distinct rustle of plastic. When I walked back into the room, he was tossing an empty protein bar wrapper into my recycling bin. His hand froze over the bin. He reached down and pulled out the brightly colored cardboard sleeve of the DNA testing kit. I had buried it beneath a stack of junk mail, but Tyler had the uncanny ability to unearth things that did not belong to him. "You doing this ancestry stuff?" he asked. He flipped the box over, studying the fine print. "Just a health screening," I replied. My voice remained flat and unbothered. My doctor suggested checking some baseline markers. Tyler tossed the cardboard back into the bin. "Waste of money," he scoffed. "Those places just sell your profile to insurance companies." He grabbed the cooler and walked out the door, leaving a trail of expensive cologne in his wake. I locked the deadbolt behind him. I knew exactly what would happen next. Tyler was a loyal foot soldier in Brenda's regime. He would not keep that piece of information to himself. The retaliation sequence initiated less than 4 hours later. My phone vibrated on the coffee table. A text from Aunt Susan lit up the screen. Susan rarely contacted me unless it was a holiday or someone needed a ride to the airport. Now she sent 3 rapid-fire paragraphs. She warned me about offshore databases. She claimed documentary specials proved these testing facilities were government scams designed to harvest biometric data. She ended the barrage with a bizarre plea to cancel the processing before my identity was stolen. I read the texts and set the phone down. Aunt Susan does not care about data privacy. She posts her exact location on social media 5 times a day. Her sudden expertise in biometric security was a script written by someone else. 10 minutes later, the primary target engaged. My phone rang. The caller ID displayed Brenda's name. I let it ring 3 times. In my profession, you learn that making a suspect wait builds anxiety. I tapped the green button and answered with a polite greeting. "Violet, sweetheart." Her voice drifted through the speaker. It carried that artificial honeyed tone she used whenever she was trying to extract a concession from a sales clerk. "What are you doing today?" Just reviewing some files for Monday, I said. She hummed a note of feigned interest. Susan mentioned Tyler stopped by your place. He said you bought one of those mail-in genetics kits. Violet, you know those things are notorious frauds, right? They mix up the vials all the time. The results are basically fiction. I held the phone an inch from my ear and listened to her pitch elevate. A person telling the truth speaks from their chest. A person managing a lie speaks from their throat. Brenda was speaking from her throat. It is just a standard health panel, Mom, I said. Dr. Aris thought it might be useful. Her breath hitched. You do not need a laboratory to tell you your health history. You have Greg and me. We have perfect charts. There is no reason to go digging around in internet databases. You are just throwing your hard-earned money away. I employed the most effective interrogation tactic I know. Total silence. I did not agree with her. I did not argue. I let the empty air stretch between us. People hate a vacuum. They will inevitably fill it with their own guilt. Violet, are you listening to me? She snapped. The honey tone evaporated, replaced by the sharp edge of a commanding officer losing control of a subordinate. I hear you, Mom, I said. She exhaled a shaky breath. Just promise me you will not take whatever nonsense they email you seriously. They just want to scare you into buying expensive vitamins. Anyway, I need you over here tomorrow morning. We are doing a Sunday dinner for Greg, and I want you to make his family potato salad. Do not be late. She ended the call before I could respond. The next morning, I stood in my parents' sprawling kitchen, bathed in the harsh light of their recessed fixtures. The granite countertops were spotless. Brenda stood 2 feet away, watching my hands as I peeled a mound of russet potatoes. This kitchen was her theater, and I was her captive audience. Making Greg's family potato salad was a mandatory ritual. Brenda insisted I prepare it several times a year to honor what she called my heritage. According to her, the recipe came from Greg's great-grandmother who crossed the plains. It required precise measurements, heavy cream, fresh dill, celery seed, and a specific brand of mustard. Cut them smaller, Violet, she instructed. She leaned over my shoulder, pointing a manicured nail at the cutting board. Greg likes the texture uniform. You know how important this recipe is to his side of the family. It is in your blood to get it right. I paused with the knife hovering over a starchy tuber. In your blood. She used that phrase constantly. It was a psychological tether designed to bind me to a man I shared nothing with. As I brought the blade down, slicing the potato into perfect symmetrical cubes, I studied Greg through the kitchen window. He was out on the patio, scrubbing the grill grates with a wire brush. His pale skin was already flushing pink in the late morning sun. I looked down at my own hands. My skin was a deep golden brown. My cuticles were dark. My knuckles were shaped entirely differently than the man holding the wire brush outside. For 33 years, Brenda forced me to chop these vegetables and ingest this mythology. She wrapped a forged identity in a layer of domestic tradition, making it impossible to question without looking like an ungrateful daughter. You are being very quiet today, Brenda noted. She crossed her arms, leaning against the stainless steel refrigerator. Are you still sulking about my phone call yesterday? I am only trying to protect you, Violet. You have a habit of looking for problems where none exist. I scraped the diced potatoes into a heavy ceramic bowl. I am not sulking, I replied. I'm just focusing on the recipe. I want to make sure I get the heritage exactly right. She smiled, a tight, triumphant expression. Good girl. She turned and walked into the dining room, satisfied she had restored order to her universe. She thought her preemptive damage control had successfully neutralized the threat. She assumed I was the same compliant girl who wore the clothes she picked out and echoed the opinions she approved. But as I stirred the heavy cream into the bowl, I pictured a centrifuge spinning in a laboratory somewhere in California. I pictured a technician feeding my sample into a sequencing machine. My genetic code was currently being translated into raw, undeniable data. The vial was a ticking clock hidden in plain sight. I wiped down the cutting board and rinsed the knife under the faucet. The cold water washed away the starch. My mother thought she had buried the truth under 3 decades of suburban perfection. She had no idea the excavation was already fully funded and actively processing. The notification arrived on a Tuesday morning at exactly 10:14. I sat at my desk on the 4th floor of a corporate healthcare complex surrounded by the low hum of central air conditioning and the rhythmic clacking of keyboards. My dual monitors glowed with columns of data. I was deep into an investigation of a regional hospital that had been systematically upcoding routine blood panels to charge insurance providers higher premiums. My eyes scanned thousands of rows of billing codes, looking for the subtle patterns that indicate deliberate fraud. I excel at finding the exact point where a story stops aligning with the math. A small white envelope icon appeared in the upper right corner of my screen. The subject line read, "Your genetic results are ready." My hand hovered over the mouse. The ambient noise of the bustling office seemed to recede into a distant, muffled drone. I clicked the link. A web browser opened, prompting me to enter my secure password. I typed the characters and pressed enter. The screen dissolved into a loading wheel, spinning for 3 agonizing seconds before rendering a dashboard of charts and graphs. The interface was brightly colored and user-friendly, designed to make discovering your ancestry a fun recreational experience. I bypassed the geographic maps and the historical migration timelines. I navigated straight to the section labeled DNA Relatives. The page populated a list of individuals who shared segments of my genetic code, sorted by the estimated closeness of the relationship. I clicked the search bar and typed Greg's last name, the surname I had carried since birth, the surname attached to my driver's license, my college degree, and my mortgage. I hit enter. The screen flashed and returned a stark white page. 0 matches found. I cleared the filter and tried again. I searched for his mother's maiden name. 0 matches. I searched for my cousin Tyler, who had taken this exact test 4 years ago and bragged about his Viking ancestry for 6 months. Nothing. Not a single shared strand of genetic material linked me to the family that had raised me. The truth dropped onto my chest like a lead weight. For 33 years, Brenda and Greg spun a seamless narrative. They enforced family traditions, demanded loyalty, and scolded me whenever I failed to mirror their specific traits. Every lecture about my heritage, every mandatory serving of that family potato salad, every passive-aggressive comment about my failure to sunburn had been a calculated performance. A lesser person might have broken down. They might have rushed to the bathroom to cry or picked up their phone to scream at their mother. But I do not break. I audit. I pushed my rolling chair closer to the desk. My heart hammered a steady, frantic rhythm against my ribs, but my hands remained perfectly still. I treated my own life like a hostile corporate takeover. I engaged my training. I opened a blank secure folder on my encrypted drive. I clicked the download button on the genetic portal, pulling the raw data files into my local storage. I took high-resolution screenshots of the 0% search queries. I gathered the evidence before the opposition even knew a breach had occurred. Then I returned to the main relative dashboard to confront the anomaly. At the very top of the list, sitting in the category labeled Parent or Child, was a single anonymous profile. The user had opted out of displaying their full name, choosing instead to list 2 initials, DH. The algorithm indicated we shared exactly 50% of our DNA, spanning over 3,400 centimorgans. The math was indisputable. This was my biological father. The system indicated the user had logged into their account within the last 2 weeks, meaning the profile was active and monitored. I needed to bypass the initials and identify the target. I scrolled past DH to the second tier of matches, the first cousins. One profile caught my attention, a woman named Clara who shared a significant percentage of my DNA. Unlike DH, Clara maintained a public family tree linked to her account. I opened Clara's tree in a new tab. I traced the branches backward. I moved past her parents, finding her grandparents, and then followed the descending lines to her uncles and aunts. I cross-referenced surnames, obituaries, and public property records using a secondary browser window. The The digital paper trail led me directly to a prominent local family, the Harrisons. They were a well-known dynasty in Salt Lake City, wealthy commercial real estate developers who owned half the shopping plazas in the valley. I traced Clara's uncle down the hierarchy. He had a son born in the early 1960s, a man who still lived in the area, a man whose first and last names matched the initials D.H., David Harrison. I let go of the mouse. The ergonomic chair rolled back an inch. The air in the office suddenly felt too thin to breathe. If my biological father had been a random stranger from a college party or a brief affair my mother swept under the rug, the betrayal would have been standard. It would have been a common, tragic cliché. But David Harrison was not a stranger. He was Uncle Richard's former business partner. He was the quiet, affluent bachelor who never missed a holiday gathering. Memories flooded my mind, shifting and snapping into a horrifying new context. David, standing by the cedar fence at my 10th birthday party, holding a wrapped present he handed to Brenda instead of me. David, attending my high school graduation, sitting 4 rows behind my parents, clapping softly. David, at every 4th of July barbecue, nursing a bottle of sparkling water, watching me from the edge of the patio. He had never been an absent father. He had been an audience member. The proximity of the deception was staggering. My mother did not just hide a secret. She invited the secret into our backyard, fed it grilled hamburgers, and forced me to politely say hello to it. She orchestrated a twisted domestic theater where my biological father watched me grow up from 10 feet away while I called another man Dad. I thought about Greg. Did he know? Was he a victim of Brenda's manipulation? Or was he a willing participant in the fraud? The way he always hovered over me, the way he demanded respect while keeping me at an emotional arm's length, suggested a man overcompensating for a biological void. I minimized the browser window and stared at my blank desktop wallpaper. My entire existence had been compartmentalized into a fabricated reality. My birth certificate was a forgery. My medical history was a hazard. My identity was a prop used to sustain a suburban illusion. They thought they could bury the truth forever by controlling the narrative and shutting down my questions. They assumed I would just accept the discrepancies because confronting them was too uncomfortable. But they fundamentally misunderstood who I am. I pulled a fresh legal pad from my desk drawer. I uncapped a black pen. I wrote the name David Harrison at the top of the page. Beneath it, I wrote Brenda and Greg. I drew a harsh, sharp line connecting them. The medical anomaly was solved, but the financial and psychological motives remained hidden. Why would a wealthy real estate developer agree to sit in silence for 3 decades? Why would a narcissist like my mother allow the living proof of her infidelity to eat potato salad on her patio every summer? There was a structural reason holding this bizarre arrangement together. People do not maintain that level of prolonged, extreme discomfort without leverage or a payout. I closed the pad and slipped it into my briefcase. The initial shock receded, replaced by a cold, calculating focus. I was going to tear their pristine history down to the studs. I would review every property record, every bank transfer, and every legal filing associated with my parents and David Harrison. But first, I needed to measure their current defensive posture. I needed to look my mother in the eye while holding the truth in my back pocket. I checked my calendar. Sunday dinner was in 4 days. I would sit at their table, eat their food, and watch them perform. I would give them enough rope to hang themselves. The drive to my parents' house in Sandy took 20 minutes. I parked my car on the pristine, stamped concrete driveway. The front lawn was trimmed to a perfect uniform height, mimicking the putting greens at the country club Greg could no longer afford, but still talked about. I walked up the brick pathway and pushed the heavy oak front door open. The immediate smell of overcooked beef and lemon-scented furniture polish hit my senses. I found them in the formal dining room. The table was set with Brenda's preferred silver flatware and heavy linen napkins. Greg stood at the head of the table carving a dry gray roast with an electric knife. The motorized hum buzzed through the quiet room. Brenda hovered nearby, adjusting a porcelain gravy boat that did not need adjusting. This was the stage where they performed their version of the American dream. Greg wore a pressed pastel polo shirt tucked into khaki trousers. Throughout my childhood, he bounced from one failed business venture to another. An indoor trampoline park, a specialized sports equipment shop, a boat dealership. Every failure was quietly smoothed over by unseen funds and Brenda's relentless spin control. He demanded unquestioning respect to compensate for his lack of actual authority. He needed to be the patriarch. And Brenda needed the picture-perfect family to project to her neighborhood association. I sat down at my designated place setting. Greg handed me a ceramic plate loaded with thin slices of the arid meat. Brenda spooned a portion of steamed green beans next to it. We engaged in the customary 10 minutes of hollow small talk. Greg complained about the local city council zoning ordinances. Brenda gossiped about a neighbor whose lawn care service was slipping. I chewed a piece of the roast. It tasted like salted cardboard. I took a sip of ice water. I waited for a lull in the conversation. When Greg paused to take a drink from his iced tea, I dropped the bait. "By the way, I got the email from that genetic testing company," I said. My tone was light, breezy, casual. I kept my eyes fixed on my plate, cutting another piece of meat. The results came back. The atmospheric pressure in the dining room plummeted. The shift was instantaneous. The electric carving knife, which Greg had picked up again to slice seconds, froze midair. The motorized hum died. Brenda held her silver fork suspended halfway to her mouth. The ice clinked sharply against the glass in Greg's hand as he lowered it to the table. Neither of them looked at me. They looked at each other. It was a microscopic exchange, a rapid, silent communication between co-conspirators, calculating the blast radius of an incoming threat. Brenda recovered first. She placed her fork down with deliberate care. The porcelain clattered, echoing in the vacuum-sealed room. "I told you those mail-in kits are a waste of time, Violet," she said. Her voice lacked its usual polished resonance. It was thin, strained, stretched tight over a wire of panic. "What sort of nonsense did they send you?" I leaned back in my chair. I did not mention David Harrison. I did not mention the 0% parental link. I needed them to construct their defense before I revealed the extent of my knowledge. "It was just a raw data file," I replied. "A breakdown of traits and geographic markers. I have not had a chance to really sort through the specific matches yet." The relief that washed over Brenda's face was palpable. Her shoulders dropped a fraction of an inch. She thought she still had time. She thought the breach had not yet reached the core mainframe. She instantly shifted from defensive panic to offensive gaslighting. "You should just delete the email," she ordered. She reached for the gravy boat, pouring a thick brown layer over her ruined beef. Those commercial labs are notorious for mixing up samples. I read an article just last week about a woman who sent in a swab from her golden retriever, and the company told her the dog was part French royalty. They are unregulated scams designed to prey on gullible people. I watched her hands. Her knuckles were stark white, gripping the handle of the gravy boat. "I am not gullible, Mom," I said quietly. "The science behind the sequencing is standard laboratory procedure. Dr. Aris uses the same facilities." Greg cleared his throat. He puffed out his chest, leaning forward, resting his forearms heavily on the edge of the oak table. He played his favorite card, the wounded, devoted father. "Violet, why are you always looking for problems?" he asked. His tone was steeped in manufactured disappointment. "You had a wonderful childhood. We gave you everything. You grew up in a safe neighborhood. You went to good schools, and you never lacked for anything. We busted our backs to provide a perfect Utah upbringing for you. Why do you insist on manufacturing drama where there is none?" His words hung in the air. A perfect upbringing. I thought about the crushing $45,000 in student loan debt currently sitting under my name. I thought about the boat dealership he bankrupted. I thought about the underlying tension that coated my entire childhood like a layer of invisible dust. He demanded gratitude for a life built on a foundation of hidden transactions. I looked directly into his pale blue eyes. I used weaponized silence. I did not justify my choices. I did not defend the scientific validity of a DNA swab. I let his guilt trip echo against the walls. A lie requires constant oxygen to survive. It needs the other person to push back so the liar can pivot and parry. When you offer them nothing but a calm, unblinking stare, the lie suffocates. Greg shifted uncomfortably in his padded chair. He picked up his napkin and wiped his mouth, avoiding my gaze. He could not sustain the eye contact. Brenda could not handle the quiet. She struck the table with her palm. The silverware rattled. "We are not discussing this anymore," she announced. Her voice rose, adopting the shrill frequency she used to shut down arguments when I was a teenager. "I will not have my Sunday dinner ruined by internet conspiracy theories and fake medical charts. You are a healthy young woman with a strong family history. That is the end of it. The topic is permanently closed." She stared at me, breathing heavily, daring me to cross the boundary she just drew. She believed she had won. She believed she had successfully bullied me back into my designated role, the compliant daughter who internalized the blame and backed away from the conflict. I picked up my fork. I pierced a green bean. I took a bite and chewed slowly. "You are right, Mom," I said. My voice was smooth, unruffled, and compliant. "The topic is closed. Let us talk about something else." She exhaled a long breath, releasing the pent-up adrenaline. Greg picked up his electric carving knife and turned it back on. The motorized hum returned to the room. The performance resumed. They ate their dry meat and forced polite smiles, convinced they had contained the crisis. I ate my dinner in silence. The frustration of enduring their gaslighting was entirely eclipsed by the cold, immense satisfaction blooming in my chest. They thought they had buried the evidence. They did not realize I already owned the entire archive. They were frantically barricading the front door while I was already standing inside the vault. I finished my meal, thanked them for their hospitality, and drove back to my condo. The biological audit was complete. It was time to follow the money. I needed to understand why David Harrison stayed quiet for 3 decades. The answer to that question would not be found in a genetic sequence. It would be found in a ledger. The older generation is a network. When one node is threatened, the others activate. Brenda and Greg thought they had silenced me, but they knew I was circling the perimeter. They would not leave things to chance. They would deploy a secondary defense measure to ensure I stopped digging. They would send an operative to monitor my progress and steal my resources. I just did not expect that operative to walk into my office building the very next day, wearing a sympathetic smile and offering to buy me lunch. Uncle Richard was about to make a critical tactical error. The fluorescent lights of the corporate lobby buzzed with a low, sterile frequency. Monday morning had arrived. I swiped my security badge at the turnstile and headed toward the elevator bank. My mind was already compartmentalizing the Sunday dinner, organizing Brenda and Greg's reactions into mental folders. I expected silence from my family today. I anticipated a cooling-off period while they regrouped and drafted a new narrative to explain away my questions. I did not expect the older generation to deploy a cleaner less than 12 hours later. At noon, my desk phone rang. The receptionist downstairs informed me I had a visitor in the lobby. I saved my spreadsheet, locked my workstation, and rode the elevator down to the ground floor. Uncle Richard stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, casually checking his expensive gold watch. Richard is Brenda's older brother. He is a man who moves through the world with the frictionless ease of inherited confidence and acquired wealth. Decades ago, he and David Harrison built a commercial real estate empire across the Salt Lake Valley. While Greg stumbled through bankruptcies, Richard thrived. He wore tailored Navy suits, drove imported sedans, and possessed a disarming, charismatic smile that could negotiate a zoning permit out of the most stubborn city clerk. He was also the family fixer. Whenever Greg's businesses went under, Richard was the one who quietly made the phone calls to smooth over the creditors. He turned and saw me approaching. His signature smile stretched across his tanned face. "Violet," he said, spreading his arms. I was in the building, meeting with the corporate leasing office upstairs. I figured I would drop down and take my favorite niece to lunch. I stopped a few feet away from him. Richard had never taken me to lunch. In 33 years, our interactions were strictly limited to holiday pleasantries and brief nods across crowded living rooms. His sudden interest was a glaring operational anomaly. "That sounds nice, Uncle Richard," I replied. I kept my voice polite and neutral. "Let me just grab my laptop. I have to monitor a compliance queue while I eat." We walked across the sun-baked asphalt to a high-end deli situated in the neighboring plaza. The restaurant smelled of roasted coffee beans and aged pastrami. We slid into a leather booth near the back corner. I placed my closed laptop on the polished wood table between us. Richard ordered 2 turkey sandwiches and sparkling waters. He spent the first 10 minutes deploying standard conversational softeners. He asked about my workload. He asked about my condo. He leaned back against the leather bench, radiating relaxed paternal energy. He was playing the good cop. Then he shifted his posture. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table, and lowered his voice to a confidential murmur. "Violet, I heard about the dinner last night," he said. His eyes crinkled with practiced empathy. "Brenda called me in a panic this morning. You know how she gets when she feels she is losing her grip on a situation." I picked up my water glass. I took a slow sip. "I am not sure what you mean," I said. Richard let out a soft, knowing chuckle. He shook his head like we were sharing a private joke about a difficult child. "Come on, Violet. You and I both know Brenda is a control freak. She has orchestrated every detail of that family since you were in diapers. It exhausts me, and I am her brother. I can only imagine how suffocating it must be for you to live under her microscope." It was a brilliant interrogation technique. He was validating my grievances. He was offering himself as a safe harbor, pretending to stand on my side of the battlefield. An amateur would have melted under the validation. They would have poured out their frustrations and handed over every piece of evidence they held. I am an auditor. I view sudden validation the same way I view an unexpected tax refund. I look for the hidden cost. "She just does not like the idea of me taking a genetics test," I replied. I kept my answers brief, offering no new data. Richard nodded slowly, tracing the rim of his glass. "People of her generation do not understand technology. They think a DNA swab is going to put them on a government watch list. But honestly, I think it is fascinating. I was actually thinking about doing one of those kits myself to trace the family lineage back in Europe." He glanced down at the closed aluminum lid of my laptop. "How does the portal even work?" he asked. His tone was breezy, devoid of any underlying pressure. "Do you just log in and see a family tree? I would love to see what the interface looks like, if you do not mind showing me." The bait was set. He wanted visual access to the screen. He needed to confirm if I had seen the 0% match, or if I had connected the dots to his former business partner, David Harrison. I flipped the laptop open. The screen woke up, prompting a password. I typed my work credentials, rapidly masking the keystrokes with the palm of my other hand. The browser opened to a blank page. "It is pretty simple," I said. I navigated to the home page of the testing site, but stopped before the secure login portal. "I just cannot pull it up right now. The hospital servers run a strict firewall during lunch hours." Richard smiled. His eyes remained locked on my keyboard. "No problem," he said. "Just curiosity on my part." The waiter arrived, balancing our plates on a large tray. As he distributed the sandwiches, I felt a sudden, calculated urge to test Richard's surveillance. "Excuse me for a moment," I said, sliding out of the booth. "I am just going to wash my hands before we eat." "Take your time," Richard replied, picking up his linen napkin. I walked toward the back hallway where the restrooms were located. The deli featured a large mirrored pillar near the bakery case, designed to make the dining room feel more expansive. I stepped behind the pillar and stopped out of Richard's direct line of sight. I shifted my angle, allowing me to view his reflection in the mirrored glass. The mask of the sympathetic uncle vanished. Richard was hunched over the table. He had pulled my laptop across the wood surface. His fingers were hovering over the keyboard. He was rapidly trying to input the keystrokes he thought he had memorized when I unlocked the screen. His jaw was clenched. The charming, relaxed posture was replaced by the rigid, frantic movements of an operative trying to infiltrate a secure mainframe. He was not there to offer emotional support. He had been sent to breach the account and delete the genetic profile before I could analyze the matches. A cold clarity washed over me. The conspiracy was not a localized domestic issue fueled by Brenda's vanity. It was a coordinated syndicate. The entire older generation was complicit in the cover-up. Richard knew exactly who my father was. He had built his real estate empire with David Harrison while simultaneously helping Brenda hide David's biological daughter. They were all guarding the same vault. I stood behind the pillar and controlled my breathing. I did not rush back to the table to confront him. A confrontation would only signal that his cover was blown. I needed him to leave the restaurant believing he had succeeded. I needed the syndicate to feel safe. I counted to 30. I stepped out from behind the pillar and walked back to the booth. As I approached the table, Richard smoothly pushed the laptop back to my side. He picked up his sandwich and took a bite, looking entirely unbothered. I slid into my seat. I looked at the screen. It displayed a failed login attempt. "Oh, it looks like my session timed out," I said. I pulled the machine closer. "Let me just log back in." I placed my hands on the keys. I made sure Richard had a clear, unobstructed view of my fingers. I deliberately typed a fake sequence. Capital B, RENDA 1, 2, 3. I hit enter. The screen flashed an error message. "That is strange," I murmured. "The portal must be down for server maintenance. I will have to try again later tonight." Richard wiped his mouth with his napkin. His eyes gleamed with quiet triumph. He had memorized the fake sequence. He believed he now possessed the key to my genetic vault. He believed he could log in from his own office and scorch the earth before dinner. "Do not worry about it," he said. His voice was warm, thick with false reassurance. "We should just enjoy our lunch." We finished our sandwiches. Richard paid the bill, leaving a generous tip. He walked me back to the lobby of my corporate building, gave me a brief paternal hug, and told me to call him if I ever needed to vent about my mother. He checked his gold watch, turned on his heel, and walked toward the parking garage. I stood in the air-conditioned lobby and watched him leave. He thought he had outsmarted me. He thought he had neutralized the threat. I walked to the elevator bank and pressed the up button. Richard's desperate infiltration attempt confirmed one crucial detail. The secret was not just biological. Men like my uncle do not risk their polished reputations or perform corporate espionage over simple family drama. Men like Richard only panic when money is involved. The biological link between me and David Harrison was already established. But genetics alone could not explain why a wealthy real estate developer agreed to sit in silence for 3 decades. Genetics could not explain why Brenda possessed enough leverage to force David to attend our family barbecues like a silent hostage. The answer was hidden in the ledgers. I needed to trace the financial arteries connecting Brenda, Greg, Richard, and David. I needed to bypass the family tree and audit the court dockets. The county archives were waiting, and I was ready to follow the paper trail. I returned to my desk after watching Uncle Richard drive away. The artificial chill of the office felt grounding. Biology is a messy science filled with emotional variables. Finance is a pure discipline. Numbers lack the capacity for sentimentality. If Richard panicked enough to attempt a daylight infiltration, it meant a substantial asset was at risk. I needed to shift my focus from the genetic sequence to the county civil records. I opened a secure terminal on my dual monitors. As a certified compliance auditor, I maintain authorized access to various municipal databases to verify hospital land acquisitions and zoning permits. I routed my connection through the Salt Lake County Archives portal. I bypassed the standard public property searches and navigated to the restricted civil docket index. I set the date parameters to the year of my birth, 1990. I typed David Harrison into the plaintiff field and Brenda Hamilton into the respondent field. The search wheel spun for 4 seconds. A single sealed file populated on the screen. The designation read Harrison versus Hamilton, a private settlement finalized in late 1993 when I was 3 years old. Because the case involved a minor, the granular details were restricted, but my credentials allowed me to pull the overarching financial decrees. I clicked the digital request form and entered my state identification number. The document generated, rendering a scanned copy of a 30-year-old legal agreement. The paper bore the stamp of a retired family court judge. I read the stipulations. The document outlined a binding child support trust. David Harrison was legally mandated to provide $3,000 a month for my direct care education and medical needs. The payments were scheduled to continue until my 25th birthday. I sat back in my ergonomic chair. $3,000 a month, multiplied by 12 months, multiplied by 25 years. The principal sum exceeded $900,000, not accounting for interest or investment yields. My mind immediately scanned my childhood for any trace of that wealth. We lived in a standard suburban tract home. I wore clearance rack clothing. I attended public schools. I never received a weekly allowance. When I needed braces, Greg complained for 6 months about the dental bills causing a strain on his budget. The math collided with my reality. The money existed, but it had never reached me. I scrolled to the disbursement section of the legal agreement. Standard child support is typically routed through a state agency or a direct joint bank account. This settlement was structured differently. The monthly deposits were mandated to be transferred into a private holding entity, a limited liability company registered under the name Desert Pine Holdings. I opened a new tab and accessed the Utah Business Registry. I typed Desert Pine Holdings into the search bar. The entity was still active. The registered agent and sole managing director was Brenda Hamilton. She had built a corporate shell to catch the incoming capital. I needed the internal ledgers. A standard citizen cannot simply log into a corporate bank account belonging to someone else. But a holding company operating within the state leaves public footprints. They file tax liens, they register assets, and they transfer property. I spent the next 3 hours pulling every available financial record connected to Desert Pine Holdings. I compiled the data into a master spreadsheet, building a chronological map of expenditures over the past 3 decades. The story the numbers told was breathtaking in its cruelty. In the spring of 2002, Desert Pine Holdings authorized a wire transfer for $80,000. I cross-referenced the date. That was the exact same month Greg opened his ill-fated boat dealership in Provo. Brenda did not take out a small business loan. She capitalized the midlife crisis of her husband using the trust fund established for my well-being. When the dealership folded 3 years later, the losses were quietly absorbed by another influx of cash from David Harrison. I scrolled down to 2008. Another outgoing wire, $45,000 paid directly to a luxury automotive dealership. I remembered Brenda driving a brand new imported vehicle home that summer, claiming she negotiated a miraculous lease agreement. She never leased it. She bought it outright using my money. The most agonizing transaction appeared in the ledger for 2014. The corporate shell wired out-of-state tuition payments to a private university in Colorado. 8 semesters, fully funded. This paid for the college education of cousin Tyler. Richard had the wealth to pay for the schooling of his son, but he was notoriously cheap. Brenda was always desperate to earn the approval of her older brother and maintain her status in the family hierarchy. She offered to cover the tuition. She financed a degree for her nephew using the hidden inheritance of her daughter. I stared at the glowing numbers on the spreadsheet. The air in my lungs felt heavy. A vivid memory surfaced, slicing through the sterile environment of my office. I was 18 years old, sitting at our laminate kitchen table late at night. I was surrounded by federal student aid applications. The forms required parental tax information. Brenda had sighed, rubbing her temples, acting overwhelmed by the burden of providing for a child. "We are just house poor right now, Violet," she had told me. Her voice dripped with manufactured fatigue. "The business is transitioning and the mortgage takes everything we have. You are a smart girl. You can take out the loans for your accounting degree. It will teach you responsibility. It will build your character." I signed those promissory notes. I graduated and spent the next decade working 60-hour weeks at the hospital network. I denied myself vacations and basic luxuries just to meet the exorbitant monthly interest payments. I carried the weight of a $45,000 debt like a chain around my neck. While I was skipping lunches to afford my loan payments, Brenda was writing checks to fund fraternity housing for Tyler. The emotional betrayal of a hidden father was painful, but this was different. This was a systematic, calculated financial exploitation. They did not just lie about my genetics to protect their suburban image. They stole my future to fund their present. They monetized my existence. I was not a daughter to Brenda and Greg. I was a revenue stream. The sadness evaporated. A cold, precise anger took its place. The kind of anger that does not scream or throw shattered glass. The kind of anger that builds airtight legal cases. I opened my desk drawer and retrieved a heavy-duty 3-hole punch. I sent the entire compiled spreadsheet to the secure laser printer at the end of the hall. I walked down the corridor, retrieved the warm pages, and carried them back to my workstation. I pulled a thick black leather binder from my supply cabinet. I punched holes through the 1993 court docket. I clipped it into the metal rings. I punched holes through the Desert Pine Holdings registration forms. I clipped them in. I punched holes through the disbursement ledgers highlighting the boat dealership, the luxury cars, and the tuition payments with a yellow marker. I closed the black binder. The leather felt solid and substantial under my palms. It was the physical artifact of their impending destruction. My investigation was nearly complete. I had the motive, I had the method, and I had the proof. But as I flipped back to the final page of the banking records, a specific routing number caught my eye. It was an account linked directly to Desert Pine Holdings, used to funnel smaller incidental expenses. I recognized the sequence of digits. It was a joint checking account Brenda forced me to open at a local credit union when I turned 16. She claimed it was for emergencies and insisted her name remain on the signature card so she could monitor my spending habits. I had forgotten the account even existed. Seeing it listed on the corporate ledger triggered a new alarm in my mind. If Brenda was routing shell money through an account bearing my Social Security number, the fraud was far more intricate than simple theft. She was using my legal identity as a shield. I needed to pull the deposit history for that specific joint account. The next revelation was waiting inside a banking portal I had not accessed in 15 years. I stared at the 9-digit routing number glowing on my monitor. It belonged to a local credit union, situated in a strip mall just outside Sandy. A memory from high school snapped into focus, cutting through the quiet hum of my office. I was 16 years old. I had just landed my first summer job filing charts at a dental clinic. Brenda insisted we drive to that specific bank to open an emergency joint checking account. I can still picture her standing at the teller counter wearing a pristine beige cardigan, holding my Social Security card. She told the teller with the thick glasses that I was a minor who needed financial supervision. She claimed the joint access was a safety net in case my car broke down or I needed funds while away at college. She made me sign the signature card, then quickly slid it across the marble counter, signing her own name right next to mine. I never used the account. The plastic debit card they mailed me expired a decade ago, forgotten in the back of a desk drawer. I assumed the balance had dwindled to zero and the bank closed it due to inactivity. But seeing the routing sequence embedded in the Desert Pine Holdings corporate ledger meant the account was not dormant. It was a functioning artery in Brenda's financial circulatory system. I opened a new browser tab and navigated to the credit union portal. I clicked the Forgot Password link. The system prompted security questions. Name of your first pet, mother's maiden name. I typed the answers, reset the credentials, and logged into the dashboard. The current balance was minimal, a few $100s sitting idle. But the transaction history told a different story. I adjusted the filter parameters, extending the search backward through the last 10 years. I watched the screen populate with hundreds of deposits and withdrawals. It was a transit hub. Money flowed in from external sources and was immediately swept out to the corporate shell. I exported the transaction log to a spreadsheet and applied a filter to isolate the largest deposits. My eyes scanned the columns until they locked onto a specific entry from 5 years ago. October, the exact month my federal student loan servicer increased my interest rate, causing my monthly payments to spike. The ledger showed a single deposit for $45,000. Banks digitize and store images of cleared checks. I clicked the blue hyperlink associated with the deposit. A high-resolution scan of a paper check loaded on my screen. The payer listed in the upper left corner was David Harrison. The memo line in the bottom left corner contained 3 handwritten words: Violet Student Loans. I clicked the arrow icon to view the back of the check. The endorsement line bore a signature. It was my name, written in cursive. But the loops were too wide and the slant leaned sharply to the right. It was Brenda's handwriting. She had forged my signature. The cold fluorescent light of my office seemed to dim. A sharp metallic ringing echoed in my ears. I traced the digital ink on the screen with my index finger. 5 years ago, David Harrison tried to set me free. He wrote a check to wipe out my debt. He handed it to Brenda, assuming she would deliver it to me. He believed he was clearing the ledger for his biological daughter. Instead, my mother took a pen, signed my name, deposited the funds into the joint checking account she controlled, and instantly wired the entire sum to her own corporate shell. She kept the cash. She let me continue waking up at 5 in the morning to work mandatory overtime shifts at the hospital. She let me live in a cramped apartment with a failing wall heater so I could afford the exorbitant monthly payments. She sat across from me at Thanksgiving dinners, listening to me stress over my strict budget, while she possessed the exact amount required to clear my debt. I thought about the timeline. The month after this check cleared, Brenda hired a contractor to install imported marble countertops in her kitchen. She paid for the renovation in cash. She built her luxury kitchen on the back of my financial slavery. She used the joint account to bypass the legal restrictions of the trust. By depositing a check made out to me into an account bearing my name, she created a paper trail that looked entirely legitimate to any bank auditor. She made me an unwitting accomplice in my own financial ruin. She orchestrated the joint account when I was 16 years old, planting the seed for future theft long before I even understood what a loan was. It was premeditated. This was no longer a domestic dispute about infidelity or hidden genetics. This was a felony. Wire fraud, identity theft, forgery. My parents were not just suburban narcissists guarding a biological secret. They were white-collar criminals operating behind the facade of a manicured lawn and a pristine dining room. They treated my identity as a corporate asset to be liquidated whenever they needed an influx of capital. The sadness I might have felt for the mother I thought I knew evaporated. A cold, precise fury took its place. The kind of anger that does not scream or throw shattered glass. The kind of anger that builds airtight legal cases. I pressed the print command on my keyboard. The laser printer down the hall whirred to life. I stood up and walked down the corridor. My footsteps felt heavy, deliberate, grounded in a new reality. I retrieved the warm pages from the output tray, the front and back scans of the $45,000 check, the routing histories, the transfer receipts bridging the credit union to Desert Pine Holdings. I walked back to my desk and aligned the crisp white sheets. I picked up the heavy-duty hole punch. The metal mechanism crunched through the paper, creating 3 perfect circles. I opened the rings of the black leather binder and placed the fresh evidence on top of the court dockets and the 0% DNA results. I snapped the rings shut. The sound was a sharp, metallic click. The binder was heavy. It contained the exact trajectory of a 30-year extortion scheme. It was a loaded weapon resting on my desk. The financial audit was sealed. The paper trail was airtight. I had the mechanics of the crime perfectly documented. But numbers on a page cannot explain the human element. They cannot explain the dynamic between the extortionist and the victim. I needed to understand the leverage Brenda held over David. Why did a successful real estate mogul allow a suburban housewife to dictate his relationship with his own daughter? To break that silence, I needed to find a specific physical artifact from my past. A lost birthday gift that would serve as my ticket to finally contacting the ghost who wrote that check. I closed the binder and locked it inside my desk drawer. The investigation was about to shift from reviewing dead documents to initiating live contact. I sat at my desk looking at the black binder resting inside the open drawer. The financial records were concrete, undeniable proof of wire fraud and forgery. The $45,000 check proved David Harrison attempted to help me. It proved he was not the indifferent phantom my mother portrayed him to be. Yet he still played a passive role. He allowed Brenda to intercept his money. He allowed her to control his proximity to me. I needed a catalyst to force David out of his silence. I needed an anchor point that proved to him I knew the extent of my mother's cruelty. A memory sharp and uninvited broke through the sterile quiet of my office. It was a Saturday in late June 15 years ago, my 18th birthday. Brenda hosted a barbecue in the backyard, meticulously staging the patio furniture to ensure the neighbors noticed our affluence. Greg manned the grill, burning the hot dogs, as usual. The Utah sun beat down on the freshly cut grass. I sat at a plastic folding table, opening a stack of generic greeting cards containing modest gift certificates. David Harrison stood near the perimeter of the yard, leaning against the cedar fence. He wore a crisp linen shirt, holding a bottle of sparkling water. He watched me open the cards, but he kept his distance. When the cake was cut and the guests began to migrate inside, he walked over to the table. He did not speak. He simply placed a small rectangular box wrapped in heavy, textured navy paper next to my elbow. He gave me a brief, tight smile and walked away. I unwrapped the box. Inside lay a black velvet case. I opened the hinged lid. Resting on a bed of white silk was a solid gold Mont Blanc fountain pen. It was heavy, immaculate, and radiated a quiet, undeniable luxury. I picked it up, feeling the cold metal warm against my skin. It was the most beautiful object I had ever owned. Before I could even unscrew the cap, Brenda materialized beside me. Her hand shot out like a striking snake. She snatched the velvet box from the table. "What is this?" she demanded, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. She examined the gold pen, her eyes narrowing. "David gave it to me," I said. My voice wavered, unsure of what rule I had just broken. Brenda snapped the lid shut. "It is entirely inappropriate," she hissed. "You are 18 years old. You are going to a state college, not signing treaties at the United Nations. This is far too flashy for a teenager. You will lose it, or someone will steal it from your dorm room." She dropped the velvet box into her oversized leather tote bag. She reached into a nearby mug holding party favors and pulled out a cheap plastic ballpoint pen bearing the logo of a local insurance agency. She tossed it onto the table in front of me. "Use that for your classes," she instructed. "I will put the gold one in the safe deposit box until you are mature enough to appreciate the value of $1. I never saw the Mont Blanc pen again. Whenever I asked about it, she claimed she lost the key to the safe box or simply changed the subject. Over the years, I convinced myself I had imagined the weight of the gold. I accepted her narrative that she was protecting me from my own youthful carelessness. Sitting in my corporate office 15 years later, the memory no longer felt like a mother guiding her child. It felt like a robbery. I turned back to my dual monitors. The Desert Pine Holdings asset ledger was still open on the screen. The spreadsheet detailed hundreds of incoming and outgoing transactions. The large sums, like the boat dealership and Tyler's tuition, were easy to spot. But the ledger also contained a chaotic underbrush of smaller deposits. Random injections of cash used to cover incidental lifestyle expenses. I engaged the search function. I filtered the results, isolating the month of July 15 years ago. Just 2 weeks after my 18th birthday. My eyes scanned the rows. The date read July 14th. The incoming deposit amount was $1,200. I clicked the corresponding digital receipt, extending the view to read the source, Origin. The Origin was a high-end pawn and estate jewelry broker located in downtown Salt Lake City. I looked at the outgoing transfer logged the very next day, July 15th. The shell company wired $1,200 to the Willow Creek Country Club, the exact cost of Greg's annual golf membership renewal. the pieces locked together with sickening precision. Brenda did not put the gold pen in a safe deposit box. She drove to a pawnbroker, liquidated the only physical connection my biological father ever tried to give me, and used the cash to ensure her husband could play 18 holes on manicured grass. She stripped away an heirloom to fund a facade. She did not just steal my college tuition. She stole the physical artifacts of my true lineage. The realization crystallized my strategy. The financial records were necessary for the legal execution, but the Mont Blanc pen was the psychological key. It was the specific, intimate detail required to shatter David Harrison's 30-year silence. If I told him about the LLC, he might deflect out of fear of Brenda's retaliation. If I told him about the pawn shop deposit, he would know she sold his silent affection for golf fees. I unlocked my desktop and opened the secure browser. I navigated to the genetic testing portal. I bypassed the colorful geographic maps and the list of distant cousins. I clicked directly onto the anonymous profile designated as DH. The portal provided a secure internal messaging system. The interface looked like a standard email client. I clicked the blue button labeled Send Message. A blank text box appeared on my screen. I placed my hands on the keyboard. I did not draft a long, emotional letter. I did not demand an apology or ask why he allowed me to believe a lie for 3 decades. In an audit, you do not ask the suspect to explain their feelings. You present the evidence and force them to verify the facts. I typed 4 sentences. I know you are my biological father. I know about Desert Pine Holdings and the child support trust you funded. I know Brenda pawned the gold Mont Blanc pen you gave me for my 18th birthday to pay for Greg's golf membership. We need to talk offline. I included my personal cell phone number at the bottom of the text block. I read the message twice. It was short, factual, and entirely devoid of emotion. It contained the exact variables required to prove I possessed a complete operational map of the extortion. I moved the cursor over the send icon. I clicked the button. The screen flashed a brief confirmation animation before returning to the dashboard. The message was gone. It was out in the digital ether, traveling toward a man who had built a real estate empire while surrendering his daughter to a suburban tyrant. I closed the browser and locked my computer terminal. I leaned back in my chair, listening to the quiet hum of the office ventilation. I had deployed the payload. Now I had to wait for the ghost to reply. But my mother was not a ghost. She was an active, vigilant threat. While I was analyzing 30-year-old court dockets and sending digital messages, Brenda was finalizing her own counteroffensive. She knew my uncle failed to breach my laptop during lunch. She knew I was operating outside her control. A narcissist losing their grip on their primary asset does not retreat. They escalate. My desk phone rang, breaking the silence. It was not an internal extension. The caller ID displayed the main switchboard number for my auditing firm. Brenda was about to launch a preemptive strike designed to rip the ground out from under my feet before David could even read my message. The digital display on my desk phone blinked. The caller ID indicated the incoming line originated from the executive suite on the 7th floor. I picked up the receiver and pressed it to my ear. "Violet, we need you upstairs." The voice belonged to Marcus. He was the managing partner of the compliance division. His tone lacked its usual brisk, professional cadence. It sounded heavy, burdened by an administrative protocol he did not want to execute. "Please come to my office right away." I placed the receiver back on the cradle. I stood up and smoothed the wrinkles from my tailored trousers. I walked toward the elevator bank, feeling a subtle shift in the atmospheric pressure of the building. The 7th floor was an expanse of frosted glass and brushed steel. I bypassed the reception desk and walked directly into the corner office. Marcus sat behind his wide mahogany desk. A woman from Human Resources sat in a leather chair to his right, holding a yellow legal pad. The presence of Human Resources signaled a formal action. A quarantine procedure was about to be enacted. I took the empty seat opposite Marcus. I crossed my legs and rested my hands in my lap. I did not ask why I was summoned. I let them initiate the sequence. Violet, we received a very troubling phone call this afternoon, Marcus began. He folded his hands together, resting them on the polished wood surface. It was from your mother. I kept my face entirely neutral. The muscles in my jaw tightened, but I did not let the tension register in my expression. Brenda had moved faster than I anticipated. Marcus cleared his throat. She was incredibly distraught. She expressed deep concern for your current mental stability. She claimed you are experiencing a severe psychiatric episode characterized by extreme paranoia. According to her, you are operating under the delusion that your family is hiding hidden wealth and secret relatives. The human resources representative shifted in her seat. Her pen hovered over the legal pad. That is an unfortunate domestic dispute, I said quietly, but it has no bearing on my professional conduct. Marcus frowned. Under normal circumstances, I would agree, but your mother made a specific allegation that triggers our liability matrix. She stated you are utilizing our proprietary auditing software and municipal database access to run illicit background checks on private citizens. She named a specific local real estate developer. She claimed you are stalking him digitally. The brilliance of her tactical strike became clear. Brenda did not just call to complain about a disobedient daughter. She leveraged the strict federal compliance laws governing our industry. A healthcare auditing firm manages millions of sensitive records. We are bound by severe regulatory statutes. Even the unverified rumor of a data breach or unauthorized surveillance requires immediate institutional quarantine. Brenda engineered a scenario where my own company had to neutralize me to protect themselves. If I raised my voice to defend myself, I would validate her narrative of mental instability. If I tried to explain the stolen trust fund and the forged checks, I would sound exactly like the paranoid conspiracy theorist she described. I understand the protocol, Marcus, I said. My voice remained flat, calm, and steady. What are the next steps? He looked relieved. He had prepared for a hysterical confrontation. My serene compliance disarmed his anxiety. We have to suspend your access pending an internal IT review, he explained. It is a paid suspension, Violet. We just need our technicians to pull your search logs and verify that no unauthorized queries were run outside your assigned case files. If the logs are clean, we will reinstate you immediately. But until the review is complete, I need your radio frequency badge and your corporate laptop. I unclipped the plastic badge from my waistband and placed it on the mahogany desk. I did not argue. I did not plead my case. Fighting the system only proves you do not respect the system. I respect the system. I knew my search logs would show I accessed county civil dockets and public banking portals. None of those actions violated hospital patient privacy laws. The IT review would eventually exonerate me, but that process would take weeks. Brenda bought herself time. She stripped me of my income source and my professional sanctuary. She thought she had severed my supply lines. I walked out of the corporate building carrying only my personal handbag. The afternoon sun beat down on the pavement. The heat radiating from the asphalt felt suffocating. I unlocked my car and sat in the driver's seat. For a long moment, the silence of the vehicle felt heavy. My daily routine, the structured 40-hour week that anchored my life, was gone. I was isolated. I drove back to my condominium. The space felt hollow. I placed my keys on the granite kitchen counter. Before I could even pour a glass of water, my cell phone vibrated. The screen displayed Brenda's name. She timed the call perfectly. She knew exactly how long it would take for human resources to escort me out of the building. I swiped the screen and brought the phone to my ear. "Hello, Mom," I said. "Violet, sweetheart." Her voice was an octave higher than usual. It dripped with a sickly sweet poison designed to mimic maternal affection. "I just had the most wonderful idea. I know you have been under so much pressure at work lately. It is making you act so erratic." I listened to the performance. She was speaking for her own benefit, solidifying the fiction she had just sold to my managing partner. "I think we need some time away," she continued. "Just the two of us. I looked into booking a spa weekend up in Park City. We can get massages, step away from the computer screens, and just relax. You need a long vacation to clear your head and forget all this nonsense. It will do you a world of good to disconnect. Her strategy was a forced isolation tactic, disguised as a bonding trip. She wanted to remove me from my environment, separate me from my resources, and monitor my behavior 24 hours a day until I surrendered. "That is a very generous offer, Mom," I replied. My tone matched hers, smooth and unbothered. "But I think I will just stay home and rest. You are right about one thing. I do have some free time on my hands now." She let out a soft, triumphant sigh. "Take all the time you need, Violet. The hospital will survive without you. Just rest your mind." She ended the call. She hung up, believing she had won the war. She believed stripping me of my corporate login credentials rendered me powerless. A narcissist always assumes power resides in titles and external validation. They cannot comprehend a threat that does not rely on a badge. I walked over to my dining table. Resting in the center of the dark wood was the thick black leather binder. Brenda made one fatal miscalculation. She assumed an auditor requires an active server connection to build a case. She forgot that the digital realm is only a staging ground. The true power of an audit lives in the physical receipts. I ran my hand over the textured leather cover. Inside those metal rings were the printed bank routing histories the county court decrees the trust disbursement ledgers, and the high-resolution scan of a forged $45,000 check. I did not need the corporate mainframe anymore. I had already extracted every ounce of venom required to execute the final phase. By suspending me, Brenda actually removed my daily distractions. She cleared my schedule. She gave me uninterrupted time to focus entirely on dismantling her life. She locked the front door of the fortress. Without realizing, I was already standing inside the armory, holding the matches. I sat down at the table and opened the binder. I reviewed the paper trail, memorizing the dates and the dollar amounts. The silence of the condo no longer felt isolating. It felt like the quiet atmosphere of a sniper, taking a breath before pulling the trigger. My cell phone rested on the table next to the open binder. The screen illuminated, piercing the quiet room. A sharp metallic chime echoed off the walls. It was not a phone call from Brenda. It was not an email from Human Resources. It was a secure notification from the genetic testing application. I picked up the device and unlocked the screen. The encrypted inbox displayed a single new unread message. The sender was listed as DH. The ghost had finally replied. The secure inbox loaded on my screen. The message from DH contained exactly 2 sentences. "I am at the roasting room on 4th South. Please come now." He did not ask if I was available. He did not suggest scheduling a convenient appointment. The brevity signaled desperation. I closed the black binder, placed it inside my leather tote bag, and walked out of my condo. The drive downtown took 20 minutes. The roasting room was an independent coffee shop tucked beneath a high-rise office building. It catered to corporate attorneys and tech developers. At 2 in the afternoon, the midday rush had cleared, leaving the space relatively empty. The air smelled of bitter espresso and sanitized floor cleaner. I spotted him immediately. David Harrison sat in a booth at the far end of the narrow room. I had only ever seen him in pristine settings, country clubs, holiday parties, networking galas. He always projected the polished aura of a man who owned the very ground he walked on. The man sitting in the booth looked like a hollow replica. His shoulders were slumped. His tailored gray suit jacket hung loosely on his frame. He stared down at an untouched ceramic cup of black coffee. His hands rested on the table, and I noticed a slight tremor in his fingers. I walked over and slid into the booth opposite him. I placed my heavy leather tote on the wooden bench beside me. He looked up. His eyes were red-rimmed, lined with deep shadows that bespoke decades of poor sleep. He stared at my face, tracing the contours of my jawline, the olive tone of my skin, the dark shade of my hair. He was looking at a mirror image of his own youth. "Violet," he said. His voice was a raspy whisper, stripped of its usual commanding resonance. "I did not think you would actually reply." "I am an auditor," I said, keeping my tone even. "I follow the data. The data led me to you." He let out a short breath that sounded like a dry sob. He reached into the inner pocket of his suit jacket and pulled out a folded sheaf of aged paper. He pushed it across the table. "Read that," he instructed. I unfolded the pages. It was a legal contract drafted 33 years ago, a non-disclosure agreement possessing draconian penalties. It was engineered by a top-tier corporate law firm. If David ever publicly acknowledged his biological connection to me or attempted to claim parental rights, he would forfeit his shares in the commercial real estate partnership he had just built with Uncle Richard. Furthermore, Brenda retained sole custody and reserved the right to relocate out of state without providing a forwarding address. "Richard trapped me," David explained. His eyes tracked my reaction as I read the clauses. I was 22 years old. We were closing our first major plaza acquisition. I had leveraged every dime I owned. Brenda got pregnant. When she decided to marry Greg to maintain her perfect neighborhood image, Richard handed me that document. Sign it or lose the company and never see the child. They cornered me. I reviewed the signatures. David's handwriting looked rushed, frantic. I placed the document back on the table. "An extortion contract explains why you paid the child support through a shell company," I said. "It does not explain why you stayed silent at every family gathering for my entire life. You watched me grow up. You never said a word." A tear spilled over his lower lash line, tracking down his weathered cheek. He did not bother to wipe it away. "Because Brenda told me you knew the truth," David whispered. His voice cracked, fracturing under the weight of a staggering deception. "She told me she confessed everything to you when you turned 12. She said you were disgusted by me. She claimed you loved Greg and viewed me as a shameful secret." I sat perfectly still. The ambient noise of the coffee grinder behind the counter seemed to fade into a vacuum. "Whenever I tried to offer you something, Brenda intervened," David continued. "When you turned 18, I bought you a Mont Blanc pen. I wanted you to have a piece of real quality. Brenda called me the next day. She said you threw it in the trash. She said you told her you did not want my dirty money." He looked down at his trembling hands. "When you went to college, I wrote a check to clear your student loans. I handed it to Brenda. She called me a week later and said you tore the check into pieces. She told me you would rather live in debt than accept a dime from the man who ruined your mother's youth." The cruelty of my mother's architecture stood revealed in all its monstrous glory. She did not just isolate us physically. She constructed a psychological prison utilizing fabricated hatred as the iron bars. She convinced a father that his daughter despised him. She convinced a daughter that her father was an indifferent phantom. She harvested the financial resources of one while harvesting the emotional compliance of the other. "And you believed her?" I asked. "She was the gatekeeper." David replied, his voice hollow. "If I pushed back, she threatened to pack up and move you to another time zone. She held you hostage. Attending those barbecues, standing near the fence, was the only way I could verify you were healthy and safe. I would watch you eat, watch you open your gifts, and then I would walk to my car and weep until I could not breathe. I paid the extortion money just to buy a ticket to watch my own child exist from 10 feet away." I reached into my leather tote bag. I pulled out the thick black binder. I placed it on the wooden table covering the aged non-disclosure agreement. I flipped the heavy cover open. "I did not throw the pen in the trash," I said. I turned to the Desert Pine Holdings asset ledger. I tapped the printed line item detailing the pawn shop deposit from 15 years ago. I pointed to the corresponding withdrawal dated the very next day. "Brenda pawned the pen for $1,200, I explained. She used the cash to pay for Greg's annual golf club membership." David leaned forward, his brow furrowed as his brain tried to process the data on the page. I turned the tab to the banking section. I presented the high-resolution scan of the $45,000 check. "I did not tear the check into pieces," I continued. "I never even saw it. Brenda forged my signature. She deposited your check into a joint account she controlled and wired the funds to her corporate shell. She let me work 60-hour weeks to pay down a debt you already cleared. She used your money to remodel her kitchen. I watched the realization wash over him. The sorrow in his eyes hardened, crystallizing into a jagged, sharp fury. The 30 years of agony he endured, believing his daughter hated him, was a manufactured illusion designed to facilitate grand theft. He traced the forged signature on the paper check. His jaw clenched. The tremor in his hands ceased. "They stole everything," he murmured. The words were quiet, but carried the heavy gravity of an incoming storm. "They monetized our separation," I corrected. "They turned my identity into a revenue stream and your guilt into an open credit line." David looked up from the binder. The broken man who had been weeping in his car for 3 decades was gone. In his place sat the ruthless real estate mogul who had built an empire from the ground up. He squared his shoulders. "What do we do?" he asked. "We do not scream," I said. "We do not hire lawyers to send threatening letters. We let them walk into their own trap." I outlined the parameters of my strategy. I detailed the timing, the location, and the precise sequence of events required to maximize the structural collapse of Brenda's suburban kingdom. The annual family barbecue was scheduled for Saturday. I instructed David to attend, just as he always did. I told him to stand by the fence to hold his sparkling water and to wait for my exact cue. "I will be there," David said. His tone was resolute, a vow forged in cold steel. "I will follow your lead, Violet." I closed the black binder. We stood up from the booth. David reached out and placed a hand on my shoulder. It was a brief, tentative gesture carrying the weight of 30 missed years. I did not pull away. I nodded once, acknowledging the newly formed alliance. We walked out of the coffee shop into the glaring Utah sunlight and went our separate ways. The biological father and daughter were finally united. The emotional gap was bridged. But executing the trap at the barbecue required more than just printed receipts and a dramatic reveal. Brenda still controlled the purse strings. If she sensed the ambush, she could liquidate the corporate shell, wire the funds offshore, and drag the ensuing litigation out for decades. I needed to sever her access to the capital before the weekend arrived. I needed to cut the financial throat of Desert Pine Holdings. As I drove back to my condo, I mentally reviewed the original business registration forms I had pulled from the county archives. A specific line of text echoed in my mind. A careless administrative error Brenda made years ago to avoid a higher tax bracket. She thought she was being clever. She did not realize she had handed the executioner a loaded gun. It was time to use my fraudulent title to freeze the empire. The air inside my condo felt charged, thick with the residual energy of the coffee shop meeting. The alliance with David was secured. The emotional parameters of the trap were set. But emotional devastation is fleeting. Narcissists like Brenda can survive a damaged reputation by packing up and moving to a new zip code where nobody knows their history. They cannot, however, survive the revocation of their capital. Money is the oxygen that sustains their alternate reality. I needed to cut the oxygen supply. Standard legal procedure dictates filing a civil suit to request a temporary restraining order on the assets. A judge would review the evidence, hear arguments from opposing counsel, and eventually issue an injunction. That process takes months. Brenda would use that window to drain the accounts, transfer the wealth to offshore entities, and bleed the trust dry, paying high-powered defense attorneys. I did not have months. I had 48 hours until the annual barbecue. I opened my laptop and retrieved the original state registry filings for Desert Pine Holdings. I scrolled past the articles of incorporation, skipping the registered agent addresses and the operating agreements. I focused my attention on the annual tax amendments filed a decade ago. When I was 23, Brenda realized the corporate shell was generating too much passive income, pushing her household into a punitive federal tax bracket. She needed a way to distribute the tax burden without actually surrendering control of the wealth. She engineered a solution that relied entirely on my ignorance. She filed an amended operating agreement designating me as a co-manager of the limited liability company. She forged my signature on the state forms, attributing 50% of the corporate tax liability to my Social Security number. She assumed I would never notice because she intercepted the physical mail and paid the taxes using the stolen trust funds. It was a flawless accounting trick designed to save her a few $1,000s a year. It was also a fatal structural flaw. By legally listing me as a co-manager on state documents, Brenda inadvertently granted me equal executive authority over the corporate entity. A co-manager holds the fiduciary power to sign contracts, authorize transfers, and most importantly, manage the banking infrastructure. I did not need a judge to freeze the accounts. I already possessed the legal jurisdiction to lock the vault from the inside. I navigated to the commercial banking portal utilized by Desert Pine Holdings. The login screen prompted a username and a password. I clicked the portal link designated for first-time executive access. The system requested verification metrics. I typed my full legal name. I inputted my Social Security number. I uploaded a high-resolution scan of my state-issued driver's license. The banking algorithm cross-referenced my data against the state registry files Brenda had submitted 10 years ago. The verification wheel spun for 5 seconds. A green checkmark appeared. Welcome, Co-Manager Hamilton. The dashboard materialized on my screen. It was a sprawling financial ecosystem mapping the exact flow of the stolen trust funds. I saw the primary holding account boasting a balance of over $600,000. I saw the linked subsidiary accounts. One fed directly into Greg's current business venture, a struggling logistics consulting firm. Another was designated for Cousin Tyler's graduate school tuition. A third linked directly to Brenda's personal platinum checking account, automatically covering her monthly credit card expenditures. The entire family tree was rooted in this single digital interface. I navigated to the Administrative Settings tab. I selected the Security Protocol menu. I initiated a system-wide administrative lockdown. The interface prompted me to confirm the action, warning that a lockdown would suspend all outgoing wire transfers, halt debit card authorizations, and freeze scheduled automatic drafts. I clicked Confirm. The system requested a new master password. I typed a complex alphanumeric sequence, generating a cryptographic key impossible to guess. Next, I adjusted the recovery parameters. I deleted Brenda's email address from the primary contact field. I erased Greg's phone number from the secondary notification slot. I inputted my own cellular number and activated a mandatory two-factor authentication protocol. The digital doors slammed shut, heavy, invisible deadbolts sliding into place. I watched the status indicators on the dashboard shift from active to suspended. The primary holding account was frozen. Greg's business operating capital was locked. Tyler's tuition fund was paralyzed. Brenda's platinum checking account, the financial artery that funded her pristine suburban existence, was completely suffocated. If Greg attempted to process payroll for his logistics firm on Friday, the transaction would fail. If Tyler tried to pay his fraternity dues, the card would decline. If Brenda tried to buy a coffee, her platinum chip would register as invalid. I navigated to the confirmation screen. The interface generated a formal banking certificate detailing the comprehensive asset suspension initiated by the co-manager. I pressed the print command. The laser printer hummed. I walked over and retrieved the crisp white pages. The ink was still warm. I pulled the black leather binder from my tote bag and snapped the rings open. I placed the asset suspension certificates right behind the forged $45,000 check. I closed the rings. The trap was no longer just an ambush. It was a fortified concrete bunker. Brenda could not run. She could not fight. Her supply lines were severed and her communications were compromised. She was navigating a battlefield while completely blind to the fact that her opponent already controlled the high ground. I placed the binder on the dining table. I walked to the kitchen and poured myself a glass of cold water. My heart rate was steady. The adrenaline spike had leveled off, replaced by a profound, absolute calm. I had executed the operational audit with surgical precision. The math was flawless. I picked up my cell phone, checking the time. It was Thursday evening. The barbecue was scheduled for Saturday afternoon. I had one full day to wait. One full day to let the financial freeze settle into the banking mainframes, ensuring the transactions would fail exactly when the trap was sprung. I assumed Friday would be a quiet holding pattern. I expected Brenda to spend the day finalizing her menu, polishing her silver, and preparing her backyard to impress the neighbors. I did not anticipate her ego demanding one final victory lap before the weekend. A narcissist who believes they have successfully neutralized a threat cannot resist the urge to gloat. They require an audience to witness their superiority. Brenda believed she had orchestrated my corporate suspension, breaking my spirit and forcing me into submission. Her vanity required her to twist the knife one last time to ensure I understood the hierarchy. The phone vibrated against the granite countertop. The screen illuminated, displaying a text message from Brenda. It was not a question about the potato salad. It was a deliberate, calculated taunt designed to remind me of her untouchable affluence. She was about to brag about a massive expenditure, blissfully unaware that the check she just wrote was currently hurtling toward a catastrophic collision with a frozen bank account. Friday morning broke over the Salt Lake Valley with a fierce, dry heat. I woke up at my usual time of 5:30. For the past decade, my mornings were a rigid sequence of brewing black coffee, reviewing preliminary hospital compliance reports, and navigating the rush hour traffic on Interstate 15. Today, my schedule was entirely empty. The corporate suspension stripped away my daily obligations, leaving a quiet, stretching expanse of hours. I stood in my kitchen, holding a warm ceramic mug. I looked out the window at the rugged peaks of the Oquirrh Mountains. I felt no anxiety regarding my career. My professional record was spotless, and the internal IT review would eventually clear my name. The temporary exile was merely a holding pattern. I treated the silence of my condo as a sanctuary. My cell phone rested on the granite counter. At 9:15, the screen illuminated. A text message appeared from Brenda. It read, "Call me when you wake up. I have exciting news." The text was a precursor. A narcissist rarely delivers their grandest accomplishments via text message. They require the auditory feedback of their target. They need to hear the envy or the defeat in your voice to truly savor their victory. I set my coffee mug down and tapped her name on the screen. The line rang twice before she answered. "Violet, sweetheart," she cooed. Her voice dripped with a manufactured maternal warmth. "I am so glad you called back. How are you holding up today? Are you getting enough rest?" She infused the question with a thick layer of condescension. She was subtly referencing my forced leave of absence, reminding me that she possessed the power to dismantle my livelihood with a single phone call. "I am doing very well, Mom," I replied. My tone was smooth, flat, and unbothered. "I am enjoying the downtime." She let out a soft, practiced sigh. "That is wonderful to hear. Sometimes stepping away from our little jobs gives us the perspective we need. It helps us remember what is truly important. You just focus on clearing your head and letting go of all those wild ideas." I listened to her weave the narrative. She was offering me a pardon. If I agreed to drop the genetic inquiries and accepted my role as the unstable daughter, she would allow me to return to the family fold. It was a classic extortion tactic wrapped in suburban pleasantries. I did not take the bait. I remained silent, waiting for her to transition to the true purpose of the phone call. "Anyway," she continued, her voice brightening with genuine excitement, "I called because I finally finalized the plans for the main floor. The interior designer sent over the ultimate renderings last night, and I just had to pull the trigger. We are tearing out the entire kitchen." I pictured her standing in her pristine house, surveying her domain. Her current kitchen was only 5 years old. It featured custom cabinetry and imported tile. But in her social circle, a 5-year-old kitchen was a sign of stagnation. "We are knocking down the load-bearing wall to expand the footprint," she boasted. "The new island will be solid quartzite, custom brass fixtures imported from Italy. It is going to be the focal point of the neighborhood holiday tour this winter." The contractor came by the house an hour ago to sign the final agreements. "That sounds like a major project," I said. "It is," she agreed. Her tone swelled with profound hubris. It takes a certain level of vision to execute something this grand, and a certain level of resources. Good contractors demand serious commitment up front. I just wrote the deposit check to him this morning, $50,000. She paused. She waited for me to react to the number. She wanted me to feel the crushing weight of her financial superiority. I was sitting in a modest condominium suspended from my job, carrying the memory of decades of student loan debt. She wanted me to understand that she could write a check for $50,000 on a Friday morning without blinking. She was twisting the knife, asserting her dominance. She had no idea she just handed me the handle of the blade. My mind instantly mapped the trajectory of that physical paper check. The contractor would leave her house and drive directly to his commercial bank. He would endorse the back of the paper and hand it to a teller. The teller would scan the routing numbers, initiating an automated clearinghouse request. The digital signal would travel through the federal banking network, seeking to pull $50,000 from the Desert Pine Holdings subsidiary account. The signal would hit the cryptographic wall I erected the night before. The banking mainframe would instantly reject the transaction. A $50,000 bounced check does not just disappear quietly. It triggers a cascade of automated fraud alerts. The contractor's bank would flag his account for depositing a volatile instrument. The contractor, humiliated and furious, would demand immediate restitution. Meanwhile, Brenda's credit union would lock her platinum profile, imposing severe penalties for insufficient funds on a commercial scale. She thought she was buying Italian quartzite. She was actually purchasing her own financial execution. The dramatic irony was a heavy, palpable entity in the room. I held the phone to my ear, listening to her breathe. She was waiting for my awe. She was waiting for my envy. I did not warn her. I did not expose the trap. I did not mention my status as the corporate co-manager or the total lockdown of her assets. An auditor never interrupts a suspect while they are actively documenting their own ruin. You let them sign the paperwork. You let them hand over the evidence. You let them revel in their assumed victory. "That sounds beautiful, Mom," I said. My voice was a calm, flat mirror, reflecting nothing but compliance. "I cannot wait to see it. I will see you at the barbecue tomorrow." She let out a bright, triumphant laugh. "It will be a wonderful afternoon, Violet. Just family. See you tomorrow." The line clicked dead. I lowered the phone and set it on the granite counter. I walked over to the dining table where the black leather binder rested. I opened my laptop and woke the screen. I navigated to the commercial banking portal for Desert Pine Holdings. I typed my master password and cleared the two-factor authentication prompt on my phone. The dashboard loaded. The red banner stretched across the top of the screen, displaying a single word: suspended. The available balance on every linked subsidiary account read 0. I logged out of the portal and closed the laptop. I placed my hand flat on the cover of the black binder. The textured leather felt cool beneath my palm. Inside those metal rings, the entire history of their deception was cataloged, indexed, and ready for deployment. The DNA results, the court dockets, the forged check, the suspension certificates. My mother spent the morning picking out brass fixtures and gloating over a fortune she no longer controlled. She was painting the walls of a burning house. The waiting period was over, the preparations were complete, the financial arteries were severed, and the biological ghost was summoned. All the pieces were positioned on the board. The only remaining task was to assemble the targets in one location and read the final ledger aloud. Saturday afternoon was approaching. The Utah heat would be unforgiving. I needed to go to the grocery store and purchase the exact brand of mustard, heavy cream, and fresh dill required for the recipe. Brenda insisted I honor my heritage. I was going to honor it. I was going to walk into her immaculate backyard, carrying Greg's family potato salad in one hand and the instrument of their total destruction in the other. The family was walking blindly into a structural collapse, and I had the only blueprint. Saturday afternoon descended upon the valley with a relentless, dry heat. The sun baked the asphalt, radiating upward in shimmering, distorting waves. I parked my sedan along the pristine curb of my parents' neighborhood. I retrieved 2 items from the passenger seat. In my left hand, I carried a heavy glass bowl containing Greg's family potato salad. I had followed Brenda's instructions, executing the recipe with clinical precision. In my right hand, I gripped the thick leather binder. I strolled up the driveway and pushed open the cedar side gate. The backyard was a masterpiece of suburban landscaping. Lush green turf stretched toward bordered flower beds. A custom pergola provided shade over a sprawling outdoor dining set. The gathering was already in full swing. The scent of charcoal smoke and charred meat drifted through the humid air. I stepped onto the stamped concrete patio. Brenda spotted me first. She wore a flowing linen sundress, her blonde hair perfectly coiffed despite the soaring temperature. She glided across the patio, her arms extended in a theatrical display of maternal affection. "Violet, you made it," she announced, her voice pitched loud enough for the neighboring yards to hear. She pulled me into a brief, stiff embrace. "I am so glad you decided to join us. I know taking time off work can be an adjustment, but you look more relaxed already." She was leaning into the narrative of my mental fragility, painting herself as the supportive caregiver managing an unstable daughter. I offered a polite nod. I brought the side dish, I murmured, lifting the glass bowl. Wonderful Brenda beamed, taking the dish from my grasp. "Put your bag down and grab a drink. We are just about to serve the main course." I walked toward the long wooden picnic table serving as the buffet station. I set my dark tote bag on the bench, pulling the binder free. I placed the black portfolio directly on the table, right next to a stack of red paper napkins. It blended into the background, just another object among the ceramic plates and plastic cutlery. I turned to survey the ecosystem I was about to dismantle. The interlocking conflicts played out in real time, a symphony of stolen wealth and fabricated history. Near the patio edge, Cousin Tyler leaned against the brick retaining wall, holding a craft soda. He was holding court with 2 distant relatives, boasting about the imported luxury vehicle parked out front. "The engine tuning is flawless," Tyler bragged, gesturing with his free hand. "I dropped a premium down payment to secure the custom trim package. It requires a certain level of success to maintain, but the performance is unmatched." He spoke with the unearned arrogance of a self-made man. He did not realize the engine tuning, the custom trim, and the premium down payment were subsidized by the forged checks locked inside the portfolio, sitting 3 feet away from him. He was flaunting a lifestyle purchased with my unpaid labor. A few yards away, Greg commanded the grilling station. He flipped thick beef patties while regaling Uncle Richard with a story. I remember when Violet was 10 years old, Greg boomed laughing at his own upcoming punchline. She tried to pitch a tent in the backyard by herself. She was so stubborn, refused any help. Half an hour later, the whole canvas collapsed on top of her. I had to go out there, untangle the poles, and show her how a real outdoorsman secures the stakes. That is fatherhood for you, teaching them the ropes, even when they fight you. I listened to the anecdote. It never happened. I spent my childhood reading library books indoors, actively avoiding the scorching sun. Greg invented the camping memory to validate his patriarch status, to perform the role of the indispensable dad. He needed the fiction to mask his biological irrelevance. Uncle Richard stood beside the grill nursing an amber bottle of beer. He chuckled at Greg's fabricated memory. Richard caught my eye across the patio. He raised his beverage a fraction of an inch, offering a smug, knowing smirk. He believed he had outmaneuvered me at the deli. He believed the genetic profile was deleted and the threat was neutralized. His relaxed posture betrayed an operative who thought the war was already won. My gaze drifted past the grill, past the boastful cousin and the chuckling uncle. I looked toward the far corner of the yard near the perimeter fence. David Harrison stood in the dappled shade of a mature oak tree. He wore a simple charcoal button-down shirt and dark trousers. He held a bottle of sparkling water, his knuckles white from gripping the plastic. He did not engage in the boisterous conversations. He remained silent, a solitary figure anchored to the edge of the property. Our eyes met. The visual exchange lasted less than a second. It carried no discernible emotion, no dramatic nod, no cinematic wink. It was a sterile confirmation between two allies, verifying their positions on the board. The ghost was present and ready for deployment. I walked over to the cooler, retrieved a canned iced tea, and stood near the edge of the pergola. The heat pressed against my skin, but my internal temperature remained frigid. For 33 years, I had navigated these gatherings feeling like an outlier, a mismatched puzzle piece forced into a picture where I did not belong. I spent decades internalizing the blame, believing my inability to sunburn my dark features and my quiet demeanor were personal failures. I endured the condescension, the hidden inheritance, the gaslighting. Now, standing on the stamped concrete, I felt an overwhelming sense of clarity. I was not the flawed component. The entire machine was defective. I checked the silver watch on my left wrist. 2:45 in the afternoon. The digital lock I placed on the commercial banking portal had been active for nearly 24 hours. Somewhere in the city, a contractor was likely staring at a rejected deposit notification. Somewhere, a credit union fraud department was drafting an urgent alert. The fuse was burning down to the wire. Brenda emerged from the house carrying a silver platter loaded with toasted brioche buns. She set the tray on the buffet table right beside my binder. She smoothed the front of her linen dress and scanned the yard, ensuring her audience was attentive. She reached over, picking up a metal butter knife. She tapped the blade against the side of her crystal iced tea glass. The sharp, ringing sound sliced through the ambient chatter, cutting over the country music playing from the speaker. "Everyone, if I could have your attention for a moment," Brenda called out. Her voice was bright, commanding, and steeped in artificial grace. Tyler stopped talking about his car. Greg lowered his grilling tongs. Richard took a final sip of his beer and turned toward his sister. The yard fell quiet, leaving only the crackle of the charcoal briquettes. Brenda flashed her performative smile. She surveyed the assembled relatives, her gaze lingering briefly on me, conveying a silent, patronizing warning to behave. "I just want to welcome you all," she began, raising her crystal glass toward the cloudless sky. "Summer is such a busy season. We all get caught up in our jobs, our projects, and our little distractions. It is so easy to lose sight of what grounds us." She paused, allowing the sentiment to breathe. "But looking around this yard, I am reminded of the foundation we have built," she continued. "We have weathered storms. We have supported each other through thick and thin. We do not keep secrets from one another. We rely on the truth to keep this unit strong. So I want to make a toast." She held the glass higher. The sunlight caught the condensation on the rim. "To family," she projected her voice, swelling with practiced emotion. "And to honesty." The relatives murmured their agreement, raising their various beverages in unison. Greg puffed out his chest, looking the picture of pride. Richard nodded solemnly. Tyler cheered. It was the perfect, sickening cue. The hubris required to steal $1 million, forge a signature, isolate a biological father, and then deliver a monologue championing transparency was breathtaking. She had authored her own prologue. The toast concluded. People began lowering their cups, preparing to line up for the food. I placed my canned iced tea on the nearest side table. I took 2 steps forward, closing the distance to the wooden buffet station. I reached out and placed my right hand flat against the textured cover of the black leather portfolio. The time for waiting had expired. The audit was moving into the execution phase. I stood up straight, squaring my shoulders. I pulled the black leather binder closer to the edge of the buffet table. The textured cover felt warm under the Utah sun. The country music continued to pulse from the portable speaker sitting on the patio ledge. Brenda held her crystal glass suspended in the air, waiting for the applause to fade. "Speaking of honesty," I said. My voice did not rise above a conversational volume, but the flat, metallic tone sliced through the humid air. I flipped the heavy cover open. The metal rings gleamed in the glaring sunlight. I bypassed the index and turned directly to the laboratory report. I lifted the crisp white page, holding it steady in my hands. "I received the results of my genetic health screening," I announced. "The data indicates a 0% parental match to Greg Hamilton. We share no biological markers. We share no heritage. The yard went dead silent. The upbeat country song played on, but it felt like an audio track running over a muted film. Greg froze at the grilling station. The metal tongs slipped from his fingers, clattering against the grease-stained concrete. He stared at me, his jaw slack, the performative patriarch persona dissolving into a hollow shell. He knew the truth, but hearing it quantified stripped away his plausible deniability. Brenda lowered her crystal glass. The performative smile vanished, leaving a rigid mask of terror. She opened her mouth to deploy her standard gaslighting script to claim the laboratory mixed up the samples. I did not give her the space to speak. I turned to the next section of the binder. The biological discrepancy was only a symptom. I continued reading from the compiled spreadsheet. The true illness is Desert Pine Holdings, a private shell corporation managed solely by Brenda Hamilton. For the past 30 years, this entity received a mandated monthly deposit of $3,000, a court-ordered child support trust established for my care and education. The principal deposits exceed $1 million. I traced the rows of data with my index finger, calling out the expenditures like an actuary reading a foreclosure notice. In 2002, $80,000 was wired from my trust to fund a failing boat dealership in Provo, I stated, looking directly at Greg. He flinched, stepping back from the smoking grill as if the radiant heat had suddenly burned him. In 2014, a series of wire transfers fully funded 8 semesters of out-of-state private college tuition, I said, turning my gaze toward Cousin Tyler. Tyler lowered his craft soda. The arrogant smirk melted off his face. He looked out toward the luxury sedan parked in the driveway and then looked back at me. The realization dawned on his features. His entire adult identity, the degree, the car, the status, was subsidized by stolen capital. He took a slow step backward, distancing himself from his aunt. I flipped to the bank scans. I held up the high-resolution image of the paper check. 5 years ago, a check for $45,000 was written to clear my student loan debt, I explained. Brenda intercepted the physical paper. She forged my signature on the endorsement line. She deposited the funds into a joint credit union account and wired the cash to her corporate shell. She used my financial freedom to purchase imported marble countertops while I worked 60-hour weeks to pay interest on a cleared loan. The relatives gathered on the patio stood frozen. The magnitude of the fraud paralyzed them. This was no longer a suburban rumor or a petty domestic squabble. This was wire fraud and identity theft laid bare in black and white. Uncle Richard understood the gravity of the exposure. He stood near the brick retaining wall, processing the data. As a commercial real estate developer, he knew the federal penalties for corporate embezzlement. He knew the Internal Revenue Service would audit every entity connected to Brenda. He knew his own business partnerships were vulnerable if the investigators started pulling the threads of her shell company. His hand went slack. The amber beer bottle slipped through his fingers. It struck the concrete patio, shattering into jagged shards. Pale foam hissed over the warm grout lines. Richard did not bend down to retrieve the glass. He turned around, unlatched the cedar gate, and walked out of the yard. He abandoned his sister to the fallout, prioritizing his own survival. With her brother gone and the ledgers exposed, Brenda was backed into a corner. A cornered predator resorts to the only weapon remaining in their arsenal: psychological warfare. She pointed a shaking, manicured finger at my chest. Her face flushed a mottled crimson. The elegant hostess facade fractured, revealing the desperate, frightened extortionist beneath. "You do not know what you are talking about," she screamed, her voice cracking under the strain. "You think you are so smart reading those stolen papers. Your father did not want you. He paid me to keep you away. He handed over that money because you were a burden to him. He abandoned you." She threw the lie like a grenade, hoping the emotional shrapnel would blind me. She banked on the assumption that the biological father was an indifferent phantom who would never defend himself. She forgot who she invited to the barbecue. From the dappled shade of the mature oak tree, David Harrison stepped forward. The crowd of distant relatives parted, forming a clear, wide path across the manicured lawn. David walked with slow, deliberate steps. His charcoal button-down shirt caught the afternoon breeze. The quiet, affluent bachelor who had hovered at the perimeter of my life for 3 decades was finally crossing the boundary line. Brenda saw him approaching. The remaining color drained from her face, leaving her skin a pale, ashen hue. She retreated a step, bumping hard into the wooden buffet table. David stopped right in front of the black leather binder. He reached into his trouser pocket and extracted a folded sheaf of aged paper. It was the 30-year-old non-disclosure agreement. He dropped the legal contract right on top of the forged bank scans. He looked Brenda dead in the eye. The sorrow that had haunted his posture in the coffee shop was replaced by a cold, localized fury. "I never abandoned her," David said. His voice was low, resonant, and shook with decades of suppressed rage. "You held her hostage." The words echoed across the patio. The lie Brenda had cultivated, nurtured, and protected with ruthless precision, shattered upon impact. She had told David, I hated him. She had told me, David was a shameful secret. Now the 2 victims of her architecture stood side by side, comparing the blueprints. Brenda tried to speak, but her throat produced only a dry, breathless gasp. The realization that her extortion scheme was dismantled hit her physical form. Her knees buckled. She collapsed into a wrought iron patio chair, the linen sundress wrinkling around her. She stared at the crushed paper of the non-disclosure agreement resting on the table. The silence returned to the yard, broken only by the hiss of the spilled beer and the hum of the country song. I did not yell at my mother. I did not demand an apology. I did not ask Greg why he allowed a child to shoulder his financial failures. Shouting requires an investment of emotion. Screaming signals that the opponent still holds power over your state of mind. I simply watched the system work. The audit was complete. The fraudulent ledgers were exposed. The biological truth was established. The silent father had found his voice. I closed the heavy cover of the black binder and picked it up from the table. The weight of the leather portfolio felt like an anchor, grounding me in a reality built on facts rather than performances. The suburban kingdom was burning to the ground, and I was the only person holding a fireproof document. I walked out of that backyard carrying the black binder and drove straight home. I did not look in the rearview mirror. The execution of a financial trap does not require the architect to stick around and watch the building burn. The system I engineered took over on Monday morning, precisely when the banks opened their doors for standard business hours. At 9 o'clock, the remodeling contractor deposited Brenda's $50,000 check into his commercial account. By 10:15, the automated clearinghouse rejected the transaction. The banking mainframe, acting on the restrictive protocols I instituted, flagged the instrument for insufficient funds and suspected fraud. The contractor, furious and feeling cheated by a wealthy suburbanite, immediately filed a police report for check fraud. Brenda's credit union reacted with algorithmic swiftness. They locked her personal platinum accounts to prevent further exposure. The illusion of her wealth evaporated before she even finished her morning coffee. She marched into her local branch demanding to speak with the branch manager. She assumed a computer glitch was causing the inconvenience. The branch manager printed a status report and slid it across the desk. He informed her that the corporate co-manager of Desert Pine Holdings had enacted a total system freeze. Brenda finally understood the depth of her miscalculation. She realized the daughter she dismissed as weak and compliant held the master key to her entire existence. Without the stolen trust money to prop them up, Greg and Brenda could not cover their basic operating expenses. The facade crumbled in a matter of weeks. Greg's logistics consulting firm folded by the end of the month. The payroll checks bounced, and his few remaining employees walked out, threatening labor lawsuits. The financial contagion quickly spread to the extended family members who relied on the stolen capital. Cousin Tyler woke up one Tuesday morning to the sound of a heavy diesel engine idling in his apartment complex parking lot. A repossession agent hooked a steel winch to the front axle of his imported luxury sedan. Tyler ran outside in his pajamas, yelling and waving his arms. He demanded the driver unhook the vehicle, claiming a bank error had delayed his payment. The driver wordlessly handed him a printed default notice. Tyler stood on the concrete sidewalk holding a cup of cold coffee, watching his unearned status symbol get towed down the street. He tried to call Brenda for a bailout, but her phone went straight to voicemail. She was too busy sitting in a sterile conference room meeting with bankruptcy attorneys. The internal review at my auditing firm concluded 10 days after my suspension. The IT technicians verified my search logs were strictly related to public records and civil dockets. No patient privacy laws were violated. Marcus called me back to the 7th floor corner office. He apologized for the inconvenience and reinstated my credentials with full back pay. But I did not need the corporate salary to survive the month. With David Harrison providing the original 1993 court decrees and the high-resolution scans of the forged checks, we filed a devastating civil recovery suit against Desert Pine Holdings. Brenda possessed no liquid capital to fight the litigation. Her defense attorneys required hefty retainers she could no longer afford. She was forced to surrender the remaining funds trapped in the shell accounts to avoid federal wire fraud indictments. I routed the recovered money directly to my federal loan servicer. I sat at my desk, logged into the student aid portal, and initiated a lump sum transfer. I watched the $45,000 principal drop to zero. The heavy chain I had carried for a decade snapped. I closed the browser, feeling a physical weight lift from my spine. The poetic justice arrived 6 months later. Stripped of the trust fund and buried under mounting legal fees, Brenda and Greg defaulted on their mortgage. The bank initiated standard foreclosure proceedings on their pristine suburban home. The house, that hosted 3 decades of fabricated barbecues and performative dinners, went to the county auction block. David Harrison operates a vast commercial real estate empire, but he also runs a subsidiary division that purchases distressed residential properties. He authorized his acquisitions team to bid on the Sandy house. The market was slow, and his team secured the deed for a fraction of its original market value. David transferred the deed into a new holding company. He drafted the operating agreement and listed me as the sole managing director. I became my mother's landlord. On a crisp Tuesday morning in November, I drove back to the neighborhood. The Utah air was biting and cold. The manicured lawns were covered in dry brown leaves that skittered across the pavement in the wind. I parked my sedan in the stamped concrete driveway. I walked up the familiar brick pathway and rang the doorbell. Brenda opened the heavy oak door. She looked frail. The elegant linen sundresses were gone, replaced by a faded gray sweater. The performative smile that used to dictate the mood of the entire household was erased, leaving only the hollowed-out features of a woman who had run out of lies to tell. She stared at me, gripping the brass door handle. Her knuckles were stark white. I reached into my leather tote bag. I pulled out a single sheet of heavy legal paper. I held it out to her. It was a standard 30-day eviction notice. The terms were drafted by a property management attorney and were strictly non-negotiable. The new ownership group required the premises vacated by the end of the calendar month. She looked down at the typed text. Her hands trembled, causing the paper to flutter in the cold wind. She looked back up at my face, searching my eyes for a trace of pity, a sliver of hesitation, or a remnant of the compliant daughter she used to control. She found nothing but the cold, sterile gaze of an auditor who had finalized the ledger. I did not offer an explanation. I did not gloat. I turned around, walked down the brick pathway, and drove away, leaving her standing in the doorway of a house she no longer owned. A full year has passed since the barbecue. Brenda and Greg currently rent a small, cramped apartment in a neighboring county. Uncle Richard severed all communication with them, protecting his own corporate reputation from their radioactive financial ruin. The family syndicate collapsed under the weight of its own greed, scattering the pieces to the wind. It is Sunday morning. I am sitting in a quiet corner booth of the roasting room in downtown Salt Lake City. David Harrison sits across the wooden table, holding a ceramic mug of dark roast coffee. We do not talk about Brenda. We do not talk about the past. We talk about commercial zoning laws, compliance protocols, and books we have recently finished reading. We are navigating the awkward, delicate process of building a relationship from the ground up. There is no performative affection. There are no forced traditions or mandatory side dishes. We are constructing a bond based entirely on verified facts and mutual respect. I take a sip of my coffee and look out the cafe window. The city streets are calm, bathed in the bright morning sunlight. The world feels orderly, logical, and sound. My mother spent her entire adult life curating an illusion. She built a fortress of lies and assumed I would never possess the tools to breach the walls. She assumed my silence meant ignorance. She assumed my calm demeanor indicated submission. She thought I was just the quiet girl who did not ask questions. She forgot that auditors do not ask questions until they already have the receipts. There is a specific kind of quiet that settles over a suburban neighborhood just after the streetlights flicker on. The lawns are meticulously trimmed, the driveways are swept clean, and the glow of television screens illuminates the living room windows. It is the quintessential American dream, carefully packaged and presented to the world. But as the story of Violet Hamilton reveals, the space between the front door and the dining room table often harbors a profound divide between performance and reality. The facade of the perfect family is a heavy structure to maintain, and too often, the burden of carrying that weight falls onto the shoulders of the children. When we examine the anatomy of a traditional family, we expect to find a sanctuary. We assume the parents act as a sturdy foundation, providing unconditional support and an honest framework for the child to build their own identity. Raising a child requires an intricate balance of emotional awareness, fairness, and a relentless commitment to the truth. Yet, in a culture that frequently places a premium on appearances, maintaining social status can become a toxic obsession. For parents like Brenda and Greg, the neighborhood image superseded the fundamental duties of parenthood. They did not raise a daughter, they managed an asset. The greatest betrayal in Violet's story is not merely financial. It is the systematic denial of her rightful history. A child looks to their parents to understand their place in the world. They seek reflections of their own traits, their temperaments, and their physical features in the faces of the people raising them. When parents obscure a child's true lineage to protect their own egos or to hide past indiscretions, they strip the child of their internal compass. They force the child to navigate life feeling like an outlier, questioning their own instincts and internalizing a sense of isolation. Honesty in parenting is not a luxury. It is a mandatory baseline. Denying a child the truth about their biological origins creates a psychological fracture that no amount of forced holiday traditions or mandatory family recipes can ever repair. Furthermore, emotional awareness dictates that a parent must recognize their child as a distinct individual rather than an extension of their own vanity. True guidance involves fostering a safe environment where a child feels seen and validated. Instead, Brenda engineered a reality where Violet was expected to be grateful for the bare minimum, while being manipulated into believing her true father despised her. This level of emotional extortion is the antithesis of family responsibility. A healthy family structure encourages a child to ask questions, to seek clarity, and to challenge inconsistencies without the fear of being labeled unstable or ungrateful. When a mother weaponizes a child's natural curiosity to protect her own secrets, she destroys the core trust required for any meaningful human connection. The financial exploitation hidden within this narrative serves as a stark metaphor for the ways selfish parents consume the future of their offspring. In American society, there is an expectation that each generation will strive to leave the next one in a stronger position. Parents sacrifice their own comforts to fund college tuitions, build savings accounts, and provide stepping stones for their children to achieve independence. Brenda and Greg inverted this sacred duty. They intercepted the resources meant to secure Violet's freedom and redirected that capital to fund their own superficial lifestyle. They bought luxury cars and country club memberships while their daughter skipped meals to pay exorbitant interest on a student loan that was already supposed to be cleared. Telling a teenager that debt will build her character while secretly hoarding her inheritance is a profound moral failure. It transforms the role of the parent from a guardian into a predator. Fairness dictates that a child should never be utilized as a revenue stream or a shield against the consequences of poor adult decisions. Parents are meant to be the launch pad for a child's success, not the anchor dragging them into financial ruin. As we reflect on the ruins of that Utah backyard, we are forced to evaluate the long-term consequences of prioritizing perception over integrity. The truth has a remarkable way of outliving the people who try to bury it. You can forge signatures, pawn heirlooms, and construct intricate corporate shells to hide the evidence of your greed. But a lie requires constant energy to survive, while the truth simply waits for the right person to look at the math. Violet did not need to raise her voice to dismantle her mother's empire. She only needed to stop accepting the narrative she was handed and start verifying the data for herself. Her journey teaches us that true empowerment often comes from quiet observation. It reminds us that setting boundaries sometimes requires a surgical detachment from the people who claim to love us the most. If a family structure demands your silence in exchange for a seat at the table, the cost of admission is far too high. Stories like this resonate because they touch the silent struggles so many people face behind closed doors. They remind us that justice is not always delivered by a judge in a courtroom. Sometimes it is delivered by a daughter placing a black leather binder onto a picnic table. If you find yourself relating to this pursuit of truth in a world obsessed with maintaining appearances, you belong here with our community. We explore the quiet, calculated ways people reclaim their power and rewrite their own histories. Take a moment to follow the Revenge Order channel so you never miss the next chapter of Earned Justice. Ultimately, the tale of the stolen trust fund and the hidden father leaves us with a lingering, haunting question about the nature of our own relationships. We all sit around dining tables during the holidays, passing plates and sharing stories. We look at the faces of the people who raised us, the siblings we grew up beside, and the relatives who claim to know us best. We assume the history we share is a factual record of our lives. But beneath the smiles, the past side dishes, and the shared anecdotes, there is always an underlying architecture. It makes you wonder about the narratives you have accepted without question. It makes you examine the boundaries you have allowed others to draw around your life. The next time you sit across from the people who claim to have your best interests at heart, listen carefully to the stories they tell. Pay attention to the details they rush past and the topics they refuse to discuss. Because somewhere, hidden behind the comfort of suburban routine, the ledgers are always balancing. You just have to decide if you are willing to look at the receipts.